recently undergrad, and I work in the computing room on the 8th floor. So I'm going to be doing a little talk today about harmful cyanobacteria blooms, otherwise known as blue-green algae, and the current technologies that we have in place to combat them. So just a little bit of an introduction. So the reason why this is a concern for me, why I kind of want to talk about this topic, is because most of my summers are spent in different lakes across Alberta. I just recently came back from a 2-week vacation where we visited 3 different lakes. And my family has a cabin out at Buck Lake. Buck Lake is just southwest of Alberta, and it's been our family for about 5 generations. So it's very important to our family. There's a lot of history there. And I've been going there my entire life. So I've been able to witness firsthand the quality of this lake deteriorate year after year. So first here, I just have a picture. This is me and my brother in Buck Lake when we were younger. You can see the water's pretty clear. There doesn't seem to be too much algae. You can see through. And then in the next 2 photos here is the current state of the lake. So this middle one here was me surfing last year. You can see how green the lake gets. Usually gets this color around mid-July. And then it starts to look a little bit more like this closer to the end, middle of August. And all this blue-green algae just kind of comes up to the shore. And we usually have to drive about halfway across the lake just to find a clean spot to use. And let me tell you firsthand, the smell of this stuff is insanely disgusting. It's super unappealing to look at. And this isn't an issue just at this particular lake. It's extremely widespread across Alberta and Canada. There's currently about 40 advisories in Alberta alone. And all 3 lakes that I did end up visiting this summer, they did have a bloom of cyanobacteria somewhere in them. So first, I just kind of wanted to talk about what exactly cyanobacteria blooms are in case anyone didn't know. So cyanobacteria, which is otherwise known as blue-green algae, as I did mention, it is a phylum of gram-negative bacteria. So despite being called blue-green algae, it's actually not technically classified as algae. Not all cyanobacteria are this blue-green color, as you can see in here. They can be different shades of green, brown, red. And this process of changing colors, it's known as complementary chromatic adaptation. And it's a way for the cells to maximize the use of available light for photosynthesis. And cyanobacteria has a very long history on Earth. It originated over 3 billion years ago, and it was responsible for important events that were essential to ecosystems and life on Earth. For example, cyanobacteria is fundamental to marine food webs and also carbon-nitrogen fluxes. And it's actually attributed with being responsible for the Great Oxidation Event. And within cyanobacteria, only a few lineages are responsible for colonizing the open ocean. So the point here is that not all cyanobacteria or blue-green algae is bad. They're actually extremely important in the environment. The issue actually arises in times of excessive growth and when toxins are produced that pose a health risk. Cyanobacteria, they're a very large and diverse phylum, and not all types are going to produce these toxins. Some of the common ones that do form blooms are just listed here, and you can see them respectively A through F in this image off to the right here, just kind of showing how large the diversity is of this phylum. Microcystis is the most common bloom-forming genus, and this one is almost always toxic. And these toxins are known as cyanotoxins, and they include toxins such as microcystins, saxitoxin, and cylindrosporopsin. And these toxins are responsible for those detrimental effects that are caused by these blooms. Okay, so now that we kind of know what they are, I just want to give a brief overview of how these blooms actually form. So under certain conditions, cyanobacteria can grow rapidly and form these harmful blooms. These conditions include temperature, nutrient availability, water movement, and sunlight. So when temperatures are higher, thermal stratification is increased, and the warmer water makes it easier for small organisms to move, and it allows algae to float to the surface faster. And then as for nutrient availability, phosphorus and nitrogen, those are the main nutrients that are contributing to these blooms. And they come from sources such as urbanization, agricultural, and waste disposal. And increased urbanization and agriculture has increased the frequency and intensity of these blooms due to that increased nutrient flowing into bodies of water through runoff. And as for water movement, stagnant waters or stagnation can prevent the mixing of water layers that further increases stratification and can lead to localized nutrient buildup as well. And then as for sunlight, more sunlight will help produce these blooms as it is required for photosynthesis. But the main contributors to this rise in blooms that has been seen in recent years are nutrient availability and warming temperatures that come along with urbanization and climate change. So kind of the perfect storm to produce these blooms is created under conditions of high temperature, high nutrient availability, low water movement, and higher amounts of sunlight. So urbanization and climate change are helping to create these favorable conditions. Here I just have an image of how these conditions are contributing to the growth of the blooms kind of all together. So you see how urbanization, agriculture, and industrialization is increasing the phosphorus and nitrogen in groundwater and through leaching, and how global warming is warming the temperature, and how this is all increasing the algae blooms. And I just have another image here just showing how the annual average temperature has departed from the reference value in Canada. And as you can see, as the years go by, it gets further and further away from that line, and it's correlated with the increase seen in algae blooms. And now I just want to talk about why exactly you should be concerned about the excessive growth of these blooms. So as I mentioned before, these organisms, they are extremely important to the ecosystem, but due to the favorable conditions created by human actions, such as urbanization, these blooms are gaining the ability to become uncontrolled and toxic. So the blooms that produce toxins, they can be extremely harmful to the health of both humans and animals. I just have an image here showing just the multitude of impacts that cyanotoxins have on the body. You can see it has an impact on the brain, respiratory system, digestive system, the body, so skin, organs, the nervous system, kind of a whole body type of ordeal. It will depend on the type of toxin produced, although the main symptoms are usually gastrointestinal, respiratory, or skin irritation. It more so depends if you actually consumed the toxins or if you just came into contact with them, like touching the water. But in extreme cases of exposure, it can be fatal. These blooms also have a major impact on aquatic life, as nutrient pollution can create dead zones. These dead zones are also known as hypoxia, and these areas are caused by algae blooms consuming oxygen as they die and decompose. And aquatic animals, they need to leave the area to survive. They can't live. So when this happens on a smaller body of water, they don't really have anywhere to go. And it is possible as well that drinking water can be contaminated by these toxins. And this actually happened in 2014 in Lake Erie. Lake Erie provides drinking water for about 11 million people. And this is known as the Toledo water crisis. So in the Toledo water crisis, the residents of Toledo, they had urgent warnings not to drink or use their tap water in any way. So they were unable to drink tap water, cook with it, brush their teeth, etc. And the cause of this was the toxins from the blue-green algae blooms that were contained within the water. This image here is actually an image from the Toledo water crisis, what their tap water looks like. And just a note that boiling water does not remove the toxins, and you can still get extremely sick from ingesting them. So if you suspect there could be toxins in the water, don't risk it. Do not try to drink it. There is an economical impact as well, as there's a cost to clean up these blooms. There's a cost for healthcare and in the loss in recreational revenue. And like I mentioned before, the look and smell is absolutely repulsive. It drives people away from these lakes and from using campsites and services near the lakes. And by reducing recreational use, the waters become more stagnant, and this produces more favorable conditions for cyanobacteria growth, and just sort of becomes a vicious cycle. Okay, and now I just want to talk about what we can do to help control these blooms. So there are a couple different methods. The first one I'm going to discuss is manual removal. This comes in the form of skimmers, rakes, oscillators, etc. And the pros of this method is that it is relatively cheap compared to other methods. The cons are that it is just temporarily removing the algae. It's not addressing the actual cause of the blooms. And this method is very time consuming, and it's not practical for large bodies of water. The cost here, it ranges. So here I just have an image of, this one here is the skimmer. It is $150 roughly, and this one in particular is 5 feet across. This one's the rake. This one is $170 and is 3 feet across. And then we have the oscillator. The price and the range of it will depend on how much horsepower it has. But typically it's about $1,400 and has a max range of 175 feet. So really not suitable for large bodies of water. So the next method I have is improving the water quality. This can be done with aeration, mechanical mixing, and dredging. The pros of these methods are that the actual issues that are causing the blooms are addressed, and aeration itself can be aesthetically pleasing. The cons are that these methods, they can interfere with the use of the body of water, and they're not always suitable for larger bodies of water. They also have a higher cost, with dredging costing about $25 to $75 per cubic yard, and aeration being about $2,000 per half acre. And there's also maintenance that will provide an additional cost. Aeration, as shown here, it does come in both above and below ground forms. And the added oxygen, it helps that decomposition process, and it makes that process occur more quickly and completely. And it also vents the extra carbon dioxide. And this means that there's less available nutrients for the algae to use and grow, and it limits future generations of these blooms. And it also helps to disrupt those stagnant waters. As for mechanical mixing, it will also help to disrupt the stagnant waters. It lessens thermal stratification, which is just shown here, where the upper layer of the surface, it becomes warmed by the sun, it becomes less dense, and then you get these very distinct layers in the lake. And lakes also, they go through this naturally occurring process of sedimentation. So over time, the sediment, it continues to build up, and this can cause serious issues such as noxious odors, discoloration, scum, algae, and aquatic weed overgrowth. And if it's left unmanaged, this water body will struggle to survive. So dredging addresses this issue, and it is done by a machine known as a dredge, as shown here, and it removes the excess sediment from the bottom of the water body. And dredging has been shown to help with removing nutrient-laden sediments. It restores stormwater detention capacity, improves water quality and clarity, and creates overall a balanced ecosystem for aquatic plants and wildlife. And the last method I have is nutrient management. So all the methods that were mentioned before, they were more temporary or suitable for small bodies of water only. The method of nutrient management, it's more long-term and suitable for large bodies of water as well. And nutrient management is usually done by managing both agricultural runoff and stormwater discharge. The pros of this method is that it is directly addressing one of the major contributors to cyanobacteria blooms, which is nutrient buildup. And the cons are that this method requires the greatest effort and would require a long-term commitment by multiple parties, which would most likely require legislation. This method would be most effective, in my opinion, but also most difficult to achieve. And also, just as a side note, addressing climate change issues along with nutrient management would have the greatest impact in helping with these blooms. So first, with agricultural runoff, I just have an image here kind of showing how it can all be managed together. So first, it starts with following the 4 R's, which are the right source in the right amount and in the right place at the right time, in terms of nutrient application in the form of fertilizers. And then there's also conservation tillage. This is reducing the amount of tilling that is used on farms, and this reduces sedimentation in water bodies by reducing soil erosion, and it helps lessen phosphorus amounts in runoff. Next would be using riparian buffers, such as deep-rooted trees and shrubs. And these are also helpful as they act as natural filters. They reduce the amount of nutrients in the runoff and also reduce erosion as well. And then the last point here would be stream bank fencing. And this just controls livestock access and grazing and decreases the direct deposition of phosphorus into the streams. And managing stormwater runoff will also help with the nutrient load as well. Urbanization has increased this load and has lots of paved surfaces that wash the pollution into bodies of water when it rains, which is kind of shown over here. We're paving roads and destroying natural habitats, and it causes nutrient pollution by doing so. There is a stormwater management guideline for Alberta, although it was last updated in 1999 and is probably in major need of a revision. And there are new technologies in stormwater runoff, such as thermal hydrolysis and microbial fuel cells. So thermal hydrolysis, it uses heat and high pressure to break down sewage, sludge, other wet organic waste. And microbial fuel cells, they are chemical reactor systems, and they generate electricity from the biodegradation of organic materials using microbial substrate. Although there has been quite a bit of success, there has been very little done to actually commercialize these new methods. And cyanobacteria can currently interfere with a lot of the water treatments that we are currently using, primarily by plugging filters and by producing those toxins, which have the potential to cause a serious illness if they are consumed. So some of these newer technologies should be considered. Another way of management that should also be considered is introducing more treatment wetlands, such as constructed floating wetlands or CFWs. And this is actually currently being done in Brazeau County with help from the U of A. And these wetlands are expected to provide a cost-effective natural option for improving water quality. They can be used at municipal treatment lagoons. They're expected to be self-sustaining and resilient to ecosystems. And I do have an image here of the actual floating wetlands that were placed by the U of A. So this is a combined effort from the Faculty of Engineering and the Faculty of Agricultural Life and Environmental Sciences. And this is what it looked like when first placed in 2019. A year later, they did post that this project was showing success and that it was important as it successfully proved the ability of CFWs or constructed floating wetlands to grow in cold climates. Previously, these studies on constructed floating wetlands were done in warm climates, and people weren't sure if they would be effective in cold climates, and that's why the study was pretty important. And one of the profs, they did recently publish a paper on this just last month, and it seems to still be going smoothly. So how floating wetlands work is they are basically a floating mat of vegetation on a body of water, and they harness the natural ability of plants and microbes to absorb nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen, and they break down contaminants through a biological process known as bioremediation. Wetlands, they can improve the water quality of stormwater runoff, and they improve watershed nutrients, as well as they could treat wastewater and other industrial contaminants. The primary mechanism that this is done by for nutrient removal is transformation and uptake by microbes and plants, assimilation and absorption into organic and inorganic sediments, and converted into gas through volatilization. Aquatic plants, both above the water and submersed, they take up and remove these elements from the sediment and water column into their plant material or biomass. And this also helps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and would help with climate change in the process. And I just have some final points here just to kind of wrap everything up. So we do have newer technologies and knowledge on how to combat these harmful algae blooms of cyanobacteria. And all these methods, they have their own benefits and downfalls. It would just take a little bit too long to go through each and every single one of them in extreme detail in just one presentation. Although I do believe that floating wetlands are one of the best in terms of cost effectiveness and in that they are self-sustaining and natural. Overall, it is my opinion that legislation is needed that involves the general public along with large corporations to reduce waste and start with applying these actual treatments. For example, there is legislation that bans the use of certain single-use plastics, limiting the use of these single-use plastics. It was being done before, but not nearly to the extent now that we have legislation introduced. And I believe it'd be sort of the same situation here, where introducing harsher legislation in terms of nutrient pollution is required for long-term change to occur. It is important to keep in mind as well that not all cyanobacteria are harmful. As discussed, they are extremely important for ecosystems. The issue is that you can't tell if a bloom is toxic until you test it. So kind of the point here is that blooms have been becoming more common with the increase in global temperatures and urbanization, and it's important to manage them before they get out of control, as they can have detrimental impacts on health, the economy, and ecosystems as well. And from the research that I've done for this presentation, we seem to have quite a few ways to combat this issue already, although clearly they aren't completely working, or else we wouldn't still have this issue. This could be because more effort is actually required to attack the root of the problem rather than the superficial ones. And this would require a global effort, which overall would not be an easy job, but I do believe that it would be an important one. Those are my references. Thank you very much. And I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
Thanks, Hayley. This is very nice presentation and very